Most people in Victorian London slept peacefully through the night, never once wondering who kept the great Clocktower of Whitechapel alive. But every night, long after the city had fallen silent and the fog had swallowed the streets, an old caretaker climbed the narrow spiral stairs of that tower, lantern in hand. Above the sleeping rooftops, among the slow-turning gears and the steady heartbeat of the clock, he guarded a rhythm that London had trusted for generations. And tonight, something about the tower feels just a little different. So dim the lights, settle comfortably, and listen closely, because the quiet story of the Clocktower Caretaker of Whitechapel is about to begin. Part 10, Farewell at Dawn. You wake before the light for the first time. The porthole window is still dark. Not the deep dark of midnight, but the particular dark that comes just before dawn, when the night has said everything it has to say and is waiting now, quietly, for what comes next. The lighthouse beam is still turning. You can see it in the way the darkness shifts above you, that slow brightening and releasing, the pulse of it, faithful as breathing. You lie still and listen. The sea, always the sea, patient and unceasing, speaking its low and rhythmic language to the cliff below, the mechanism in the tower above, its hum traveling down through the stone. Somewhere outside, a single bird. You do not know which kind, only that its note is clear and rising and entirely untroubled. A small bright sound in the vast quiet of the pre-dawn. It calls once, and then again, and then the silence reassembles itself around it, deeper for having been broken. You do not want to get up, not because you are unwilling to leave. You know that you must, that the life waiting for you is your life, and it is asking for you back, gently but clearly. But because this room, this curved stone room with its porthole window and its quilts and the hum of the turning lens above has become, in a very short time, something that feels like an old belonging, a place you did not know you needed until you had it. You want to stay in it a little longer, to breathe it a few more times. So you do. You lie in the warm dark and breathe and listen and let yourself be here, fully, for these last unhurried minutes. The quilts hold you. The stone holds the quilts. The headland holds the stone. The sea holds the headland, as it has always held it, shaped it, made it what it is. You hold all of it, too, in your own small way, in memory, which is the only way any of us can hold a place once we have left it. The window begins to change. It happens so gradually that you cannot point to the moment it begins. Only notice, at some point, that the dark has softened, that where there was nothing there is now a very faint suggestion of color, a lightening at the edge of the sky that is less a color than an intimation of one. Pewter becoming gray, becoming very slowly the first pale intimation of blue. You watch it and feel the way dawn always makes you feel when you are awake to receive it properly, as if something is being given, as if the world is beginning again, as it always does, and as it always will, long after any of us are here to watch. You rise. Edric is already in the kitchen, of course. He is standing at the stove, as he was that very first morning, with his back to you and his tea in his hand, looking out the window at the sea which is, this morning, extraordinary. The dawn light catching it at the lowest possible angle, turning the water to hammered copper and rose gold. The swells moving through it slowly, each one a slightly different shade of the same warm color. You stand in the doorway for a moment and look at his back, at his white hair, at the set of his shoulders, at the particular quality of stillness he carries everywhere with him like a second coat, and you feel something that is mostly gratitude and partly grief, the small, clean grief of leaving something good. He hears you, as he always hears you, without turning. "Good morning," he says, and then, "Look at it today." "I'm looking," you say. He turns then and sees your face, and his own face does something quiet and knowing, and he nods once, slowly, and pours you a cup of tea. You sit at the kitchen table together for the last time. The breakfast is simple: bread and butter and a soft-boiled egg, but kind of breakfast that is perfect in its plainness, that needs nothing added to it. You eat slowly. The copper light on the water shifts gradually toward gold as the sun lifts itself clear of the horizon, and the sea changes again, becoming bluer, more itself. The dawn colors, releasing it back to its daytime character. The lighthouse beam, which has been turning through the night, fades now into the growing light, not turning off, just becoming invisible, as it does each morning, its work for the night completed. The bird outside calls again. More of them now, a small chorus assembling itself in the cliff grass, tuning up for the day. "You have everything?" Edric asks eventually. You think of the amber sea glass in your jacket pocket, the green piece from the second day on the beach, the smooth gray stone, perfect and dark, the compass, wrapped in a cloth and placed carefully in the inner pocket of your bag, where you will feel it against your chest as you walk. "Everything," you say. He walks you to the gate. The yard is bright with morning now, the low sun striking the lighthouse tower and turning the old gray stone almost golden, and above it, still, always turning. The lantern room catches the light and throws it back in long prismatic flashes that travel across the yard and over the gate and out along the coastal path ahead of you. The grass on either side of the path is beaded with dew, each drop holding its own tiny sun, and the air is cool and clean and carries with it the smell of the sea and the low-growing herbs between the path stones and something else. Something that might simply be the smell of a morning that is fully itself. At the gate, you stop and turn. Edric stands a few feet back, his hands in the pockets of the storm cloud sweater, his white hair lifting slightly in the morning breeze. He looks at you with the expression you have come to know and will not forget. Warm and knowing and gentle and entirely without need of anything from you beyond what you have already given, which is simply your presence, your attention, your willingness to be here. "Safe travels," he says. His voice is the same as it always is, low and unhurried, roughened by salt air, carrying in it all the weather of his long and faithful years on this headland. "Thank you," you say. And as before, the words carry more than they can contain. But he receives all of it. You can see that the way he receives everything, quietly, completely, without making more of it than it is, or less. You reach into your inner pocket and feel the compass there, its brass warm now, already part of you. "I'll take care of it," you say. He smiles, the slow smile beginning in the eyes. "I know you will." You turn and go through the gate. The coastal path stretches ahead of you, winding north along the clifftop, and you walk it slowly, as you have learned to walk in this place, with your eyes open and your pace matched to what is around you, rather than to any destination. The sea is to your right, enormous and blue and quietly alive, the swells moving through it with their patient, steady breathing. The cliff grass is green and damp, and the small hardy flowers among it are opening to the morning. The sea pinks and the tiny yellow things you have never learned the name of, and the occasional flash of something white and delicate that bends in the slightest wind. You walk, and the lighthouse falls behind you. You do not turn for a while, not because you don't want to. You do, deeply, but because you want to wait until the wanting is fully formed, until the moment is ready to be seen properly. You walk, and the path turns slightly, and you hear the foghorn from somewhere down the coast, one long, low note drifting up through the morning air, tender as it has always been, the sound that says, "I am here, I am here. You are not alone." Then you turn. The lighthouse stands on the headland behind you, smaller now with distance, but entirely clear in the morning light. The old gray tower rising from the cliff, the lantern room at its top catching the sun, and the beam still turning, invisible in the daylight, but turning as it always turns, as it turned through the night just past and will turn through the night to come. At the base of the tower, the cottage, its windows catching the light, the low stone wall, the gate. Edric is still there, a small figure now, at this distance, but unmistakable. The white hair, the storm cloud sweater, the hands in the pockets, the stillness. He is watching you go, and something in the fact of that he has stayed to watch, that he is still there, fills your chest with a warmth that you think will take a long time to cool. You raise one hand. After a moment, he raises his. You turn back to the path and walk on. The lighthouse grows smaller behind you as the path curves away from the headland, and the land begins to change. The open clifftop giving way to a gentler slope, the salt grass yielding to longer growth, a hedgerow appearing on the left, the first signs of the ordinary world reassembling itself around you. But you do not feel the weight of it yet. The ordinary world can wait a little longer. You are still here, still walking this path between the sea and the sky, still carrying in you everything that these days have left behind. The compass rests against your chest. The sea glass is in your pocket, smooth and cool and amber. The words are with you too, all of them. Edric's quiet words gathered over days by the fire and on the cliff and in the lantern room and on the night beach under the stars. Let it be slow. Begin again each day. The light moves through the darkness steadily, without frightening itself. If you know where north is, you can find any direction from it. These are not instructions. They are not rules. They are simply what is true, offered without urgency, available now whenever you need them, which is to say, they are yours. The path bends once more, and the sea comes back into full view. The whole wide blue of it stretching to the horizon, the morning light lying across it in long golden bands. You stop for a moment and simply look at it the way Edric has taught you to look at things, with your full and unhurried attention, without deciding in advance what you will find. What you find is this: the sea is very large and very old and entirely indifferent to your smallness, and in that indifference there is a great and restful freedom. You are not required to be large. You are not required to be anything other than what you are, a person on a path, carrying a compass, walking slowly toward whatever comes next, changed in some quiet and permanent way by a few days at the edge of the world. You breathe in, you breathe out. The foghorn sounds once more, faint now with distance, and then fades. The sea goes on, and now as the path leads you gently forward, as the morning holds you in its golden, unhurried light, as the sound of the waves grows soft as breathing, and softer still, Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest. Let the compass rest against your chest and feel it there, warm and steady, its needle pointing north through everything, through all the days and all the distances and all the darkness, always finding the fixed point, always holding true. You are walking toward rest now. Outside, the lamplighters began their rounds, kindling small stars of warmth against the gathering night. And inside, the old goldsmith smiled and worked on, content in the knowledge that tomorrow the sun would rise again, the door would open again, and the great, beautiful, ordinary work of living would continue. For Aldrich Pennywhistle had learned what all wise souls eventually discover, that the measure of a life is not in its length or its drama, but in its depth of attention, its quality of care, its willingness to be present for the small, sacred moments that make up the great tapestry of human experience. He had lived such a life. He was living it still. And when his time came, as it would come to all, he would leave behind not monuments or fortunes, but something far more precious, the memory of kindness, the legacy of skill, the quiet example of a man who had chosen day after day to make the world just a little more beautiful, one careful repair at a time. That was the true gold. That was the lasting treasure. And that was the story of the goldsmith of Cheapside, a story that would be told in whispers and fragments long after he was gone, carried forward by the people whose lives he had touched, whose broken things he had mended, whose hearts he had helped to heal. It was a good story, a true story, a story worth telling. And in the end, what more could any soul hope for than to have lived a story worth the telling? The evening deepened. The stars emerged, and the goldsmith of Cheapside worked on in his pool of lamplight, content and grateful and at peace with the world and with himself. Sleep, sleep, relax, and sleep. The road narrows before it ends. You may not have noticed when it happened. Exactly when the asphalt gave way to gravel, when the gravel softened into a dirt track worn smooth by years of sea wind and quiet footsteps. But somewhere along the way, the world you had come from began to feel very far away. The noise of it, the weight of it, all of that had begun to dissolve, like mist burning off in the morning, leaving behind something quieter and older and more real. You follow the path as dusk deepens into a soft indigo haze. To your left, the sea. You can hear it before you can see it clearly. A low rhythmic murmur, patient as breathing, rising and falling against the stone below. The waves are gentle tonight. They speak in long, unhurried syllables, drawing themselves up and pulling back again and again in the language that the ocean has been speaking since long before anyone was here to listen. It is not an urgent sound. It asks nothing of you. It simply continues, as it always has, as it always will. The air is cool and carries with it the particular freshness of a coastal evening. Salt and stone and the faint sweetness of some low-growing coastal herb you cannot name but feel you have always known. You breathe it in slowly. You notice how your shoulders drop. You notice how your jaw, which you did not realize had been clenched, softens. You let the air in and you let something else out. Something you have been carrying perhaps without knowing it. Ahead of you, The cliff rises gently. Gulls circle there, 3 or 4 of them, turning slow arcs against the sky. Their cries are distant, softened by the wind, and they seem less like disturbances than like signatures, small marks the sea makes in the air to say, "Here, this is the edge. This is the place where land becomes sky, becomes water." And then you see it. At first, it is only a shape against the fading light, a dark cylinder rising from the headland, set against the last pale wash of sunset in the west. But then, as you walk nearer, the lighthouse begins to resolve itself into something more specific and particular. Stone, you realize. Old gray stone. The kind that has absorbed centuries of wind and salt and moonlight and given them back in a certain quality of permanence, a certain steadiness that no new thing possesses. The lighthouse stands the way very old things stand, not rigidly, not defiantly, but with a settled confidence, as if it has long since made peace with the permanence of its purpose. The light has not yet come on, but soon. The sky is still holding its last pale colors, lavender and dusty rose in the west, deepening to a soft dark blue overhead, where the first stars are beginning to appear. You can see them now, just barely, as if they are waking gradually, finding their places. The lighthouse waits for darkness, as you do. There is a kinship in that, and you feel it. A lantern hangs at the gate of a low stone wall that surrounds the lighthouse and a small keeper's cottage at its base. The lantern burns steadily, its warm amber light falling in a gentle circle on the path. It is the kind of light that says, "You are expected. Come in. Rest now." The gate stands open just a little, as if it has been left so on purpose. You push it gently. The hinges do not creak so much as sigh, the way old things sigh when they've been doing the same thing for a long time and have come to find comfort in repetition. The path inside the wall is of smooth, flat stones, set into the earth, each one worn slightly in the center from the passage of boots over many years. Small, low-growing plants push up between them. Thyme, perhaps, or something similar, giving off the faintest herbal scent when the wind catches them. The cottage sits to one side of the lighthouse base, modest and square, with thick walls and small, deep-set windows from which warm light spills out onto the ground. You hear, rather than see, him first. A door opens. The sound of it is unhurried. Footsteps on stone. Slow, even, the footsteps of a person who has nowhere else to be and knows it. Then, a figure in the doorway, outlined by the golden interior light. An old man, not tall, with a weathered face and white hair, lifted at the temples by the evening breeze. He wears a heavy wool sweater the color of storm clouds, and he stands in the way that people stand who have spent a great deal of time outdoors, easy in their body, acquainted with stillness. He sees you and smiles. It is a slow smile, the kind that begins at the eyes. There is warmth in it, and something quieter than warmth, a kind of recognition, as if he has been expecting you, though you cannot think how. "Ah," he says. His voice is low and unhurried, roughened a little by sea air, but gentle. "You found your way, then?" "I think so," you say, and realize as you say it that you are not entirely sure which way you have found. To the lighthouse? Yes, but perhaps to something else as well. Some quieter place inside yourself. The old man nods, as if he understands this perfectly. "Come in out of the wind," he says. "I have the kettle on." Those words, simple as they are, settle over you, like a warm blanket. You follow him inside. His name, he tells you as he moves about the small entrance hall, is Edric. He has kept this lighthouse for many years. So many that when you ask, he pauses for a moment, counting in some private way, and then laughs softly and says, "It doesn't matter exactly. Long enough that it feels like home," he says. Long enough that he has stopped thinking of the sea as separate from himself. The entrance hall is low-ceilinged and smells of wood smoke and something pleasantly herbal, dried lavender perhaps, hanging in a bundle from one of the old iron hooks. By the door, there are boots lined up with care and a row of coats in various stages of use and weathering. A barometer hangs on one wall, its needle pointing gently toward fair. Everything here is orderly and worn smooth with use and comfortable in the way that only well-loved things become. You remove your coat. You hang it on a hook. You breathe. From somewhere deeper in the cottage, the kettle begins its low building song. Through the entrance hall window, now that the light inside has lit the evening darker, you can see the beam sweeping out across the water for the first time. White and slow and immense, moving across the face of the dark sea, like a thought crossing a quiet mind, the lighthouse has come alive. The night has found its purpose, and you, standing here in this warm, small hall, with the smell of wood smoke and the sound of a kettle, and the knowledge that the sea is just outside and going nowhere, you feel something that you have not felt in a long while. You feel perfectly, completely still. "The light always settles something in me," Edric says from the next room, as if he has read your thought. "It did the first time I saw it, all those years ago. It does still." You move toward his voice, toward the warmth of the fire you can hear now crackling softly, toward the amber glow that spills through the doorway like an invitation. Outside, the beam sweeps and sweeps. The waves continue their ancient conversation with the stone below. Somewhere out on the water, a foghorn sounds, low and long and full of a tenderness you hadn't known a foghorn could have. It fades. The waves continue. The beam sweeps on. You are here. You are safe. The edge of the world turns out to be exactly the right place to rest. Part 2, the lighthouse keeper's home. The cottage is small, and it is everything. That is the first thing you understand as Edric leads you through the low doorway and into the sitting room, that a space can be small and still contain multitudes. That walls, if the right things have happened within them over enough years, develop a kind of warmth that has nothing to do with the fire, though the fire helps. It crackles in a wide stone hearth at the far end of the room, unhurried and generous, casting its amber light across everything it touches and making everything it touches look like something from a memory you almost have. You stand for a moment in the doorway and simply look. The floors are old wood, darkened with age and use, smooth underfoot in the way of floors that have known many years of quiet footsteps. They creak very softly as Edric moves across them. Not an alarming creak, but a settling one. The sound of a house that knows you are here and is acknowledging it. A woven rug in faded blues and greens covers the center of the room, its pattern worn to something gentle and almost abstract, like a map of a sea that exists only in dreams. Along one wall, floor to ceiling, books, not arranged for show but for use, some standing upright, some leaning, some lying flat as bookmarks for the others. Their spines are a long, slow conversation of colors: deep red, sea green, the brown of wet sand, the cream of old paper. Some have no titles you can read from here, worn away by the handling of years. Others you can just make out charts, tide records, natural histories of coastal birds, the memoirs of captains and navigators, collections of poetry, a great many novels with a particular softness of books that have been read more than once. Between the books, tucked into the shelves like small, quiet treasures, a large conch shell, its interior a faded rose, a glass float, pale green, the kind that used to travel on fishing nets, a small brass compass in a leather case, a piece of driftwood worn by the sea into something almost sculptural, 3 or 4 smooth stones in colors that could only have come from this particular shore. You feel, looking at all of this, that you are reading a life. Sit, sit, Edric says, gesturing toward one of the 2 armchairs by the fire. They are old chairs, wide and deep, and upholstered in a fabric that has faded from what might once have been burgundy to something softer, the color of a rose, pressed in a book and kept for years. The cushions have molded themselves over time to the shapes of the people who have sat in them. And when you lower yourself into one, it receives you with a kind of considered ease, as if it has been waiting for exactly someone your size and weight and wariness. You sink in, you let out a breath. The fire speaks quietly to itself in the hearth. From the kitchen, a small room off the sitting room, partially visible through an open door, come the sounds of Edric moving about, the soft percussion of a cabinet opening, the gentle clink of ceramic, the low song of the kettle beginning its work again. The sounds are unhurried. They are the sounds of a person who does not rush anything, who has learned, or perhaps always known, that things happen at the speed they need to and no faster. You look at the walls. Between the bookshelves, where the plaster shows, there are charts pinned or framed. Nautical charts, you realize, old ones with the particular beauty of things drawn by hand, their lines marking depth and current and shoal and safe passage. They are faded to the color of old linen, their ink brown where it was once black, their edges soft. One very large chart takes up much of the wall to the left of the fireplace, and you can see this coastline on it, the headland, the bay, and somewhere on the headland, a small symbol marking the lighthouse. Marked, you notice, in ink slightly darker than the rest, as if it has been gone over more than once, as if someone wanted to be sure it was there. On the mantelpiece above the fire, a wooden clock, ticking with a deep, unhurried voice. A small painting of the lighthouse in a silver frame. Daytime, summer, the sea, very blue below it. 3 candles in different stages of use, the wax soft and dripped into comfortable puddles at their bases. And in the center, a large nautilus shell, its chambers catching the firelight and holding it in spirals that go inward and inward toward some still, unreachable center. Edric comes through with 2 wide ceramic mugs and sets, one on the small table beside your chair. The steam rises from it in slow curls. It smells of something warming, honey and ginger, and something herbal beneath, chamomile perhaps, and something else you cannot name, but that smells like it belongs to evenings at the edge of the sea. Careful, he says, it's hot still. He settles into the other chair with a slowness that is not infirmity, but ease. The ease of a person who has sat in this chair 1,000 times and knows exactly how to do it. He wraps his hands around his own mug and looks into the fire for a moment in silence. And the silence is entirely comfortable, the kind that needs no filling. Outside, the lighthouse beam sweeps. You can see its passage faintly through the small window beside the fire, a brightening and a fading and a brightening again, slow and steady as a heartbeat. "How long have you been here?" you ask, when the silence has rested long enough that speaking feels natural. Edric considers. He has the unhurried quality of someone who gives every question its due weight. "I came here when I was 32, he says at last. "I had been a sailor before that, merchant vessels mostly. I knew the sea from the deck, but I wanted to know it from the shore." He pauses. "It's different, you know. From the deck, the sea is something you move through. From here," he glances toward the window, toward the sound of the waves. "It's something that moves through you. You hold your mug with both hands and let the warmth travel up through your palms. You take a small sip. It is still very hot and sweet and gentle, and something in it immediately begins to do a quiet work somewhere behind your sternum. A loosening. The lighthouse, you say. How old is it?" Edric smiles at the fire. "She was built in 1847, he says. And there is something tender in the way he says it, the way some people speak of very old things they love. The original light was oil. Whale oil at first, then later paraffin. There was a keeper here every night in those days, 2 of them usually, sharing the watches. The light had to be tended through the hours, the oil replenished, the lens cleaned, the mechanism wound." He looks up at the ceiling, in the direction of the tower you know rises just beyond these walls. "She's changed with the times, electric now, and mostly automatic. But I still keep the old logs, still maintain the schedules. Some things shouldn't be left entirely to machines, I think." There is a long, easy pause. The fire settles with a soft sound, a log shifting, a constellation of sparks rising briefly and going out. From somewhere outside, you cannot tell exactly where, a gull makes one slow, sleepy cry, and then is quiet. The waves continue their work below the cliff. The early keepers, Edric says, with the quiet pleasure of someone turning to a favorite subject, were extraordinary people. Imagine it, months at a stretch in a place like this, just you and the sea and the light, the loneliness of it. But the records they left, the logs, they don't read like loneliness mostly. They read like people who had found something, a kind of clarity maybe, a sense that what they were doing mattered, that the ships moving in the dark out there were safer for their presence. He looks at you. There's a great deal of peace to be found in that, I think, in a purpose that is simple and clear and genuinely good. You find that you agree, though you are not sure you could have said so in those words before tonight. The fire burns lower and softer. You drink your tea in slow, warm sips. The ginger has settled into a pleasant warmth somewhere in your chest. Outside, the beam sweeps and sweeps. You notice that you have stopped counting your worries, that they have not so much disappeared as receded, like the tide pulling back to reveal the clean, smooth sand beneath. Edric tells you about the winter storms, not with fear in his voice, but with a kind of respectful wonder, the way you speak of things that are larger than you and always will be. He tells you about the seabirds that nest in the cliff below every spring, the way they return to the exact same ledge year after year, finding their way home across thousands of miles of open ocean. He tells you about the ships he has watched pass, their lights moving slowly across the dark water, and how he has thought about the people on them, going somewhere, and felt a quiet goodwill toward every one. The cottage holds all of this. The books hold it. The charts hold it. The fire holds it and gives it back as warmth. At some point, you could not say exactly when, you realize that your eyes have grown heavy, not unpleasantly, in the way that eyes grow heavy when the body at last believes it is safe, when the nervous system puts down what it has been carrying and says, here is enough. Here we can rest. Edric notices the way he seems to notice everything, quietly, without making much of it. The guest room is just at the base of the tower, he says, setting down his mug. I've made it up. There's a window that looks east, over the water. He pauses. You'll hear the light turning. Some people find it takes getting used to. Most find they sleep better for it. He leads you through a narrow doorway and into a short passage that curves slightly. You are entering the base of the lighthouse itself now, you realize. The walls here are stone and thicker, and they have a coolness that is not unpleasant. There is a low wooden door, which he opens, and beyond it, a small room that is nearly round, as the lighthouse is round, with a ceiling that follows the curve of the stone walls. The bed is narrow and high and covered with quilts in the blues and whites of seafaring things. There is a small window, round as a porthole, as he said, looking east. Through it, the night sky, and just at the edge of vision, the faint, pale line where sky meets sea. Sleep well, Edric says, and his voice is low and warm and certain, the way voices are when they mean what they say. He pulls the door closed behind him. His footsteps move back down the passage. Unhurried, you sit on the edge of the bed. The quilts are cool and soft under your hands. The lighthouse beam sweeps outside, and through the porthole window, its light moves briefly across the ceiling. Once, and then the room is dark again, and then again, slow and even and rhythmic as breathing. You lie back. The pillow is soft, the quilts are heavier than you expected, and exactly the right weight. The sound of the waves comes through the stone walls, muffled and deepened by the thickness of them, so that it is less a sound than a feeling, a vibration at the very base of things, a rhythm the world keeps with or without your attention. You close your eyes. His hands moved with the unconscious grace of long practice. The wicks dipped and rose, each time emerging a fraction thicker than before, the wax building up in smooth, even layers. Slowly, so slowly that the change was almost imperceptible from moment to moment. Thin string became slender candle. The work left his mind free to wander, though it never wandered far. Memories drifted up like smoke. His father standing at this very table, his hands performing these same motions. His own younger self, learning the craft, impatient at first with the slowness of it, the repetition, gradually coming to understand that the slowness was the point, that the repetition was where the quality lived. He remembered the first candle he had made entirely by himself, how proud he had been, how his father had examined it with serious eyes before nodding once, a single nod that had meant more than 1,000 words of praise. He remembered winters, when the demand for candles was so great that he and his father had worked long into the night. The workshop warm despite the cold outside, the two of them moving in companionable silence, the work creating a bond that needed no words to strengthen it. The rain began while he worked, so softly at first that he didn't immediately notice. It was only when the sound registered, a gentle pattering against the window, a whisper against the roof, that he looked up and saw the water streaking the glass. A winter rain, cold but not freezing, the kind that would turn the streets to mud and keep sensible people by their fires. The sound of it was pleasant, a quiet accompaniment to the work of his hands. Inside the workshop, all was warmth and light and the sweet smell of beeswax. Outside, the gray afternoon grew grayer, but it seemed distant, separate, a different world entirely. Dip, lift, wait, dip, lift, wait. The candles were taking shape now, growing from thin tapers to something more substantial. Mr. Halbrook's experienced eye judged their progress. A few more rounds, perhaps, and they would be ready. Not too thick. These were meant to be elegant, refined, suitable for the cathedral's altar. Too thick, and they would look clumsy, inappropriate. He continued his work, his breathing slow and even, his movements steady and sure. There was no part of him that was elsewhere, no portion of his attention that wished to be doing something other than what he was doing. This was enough. This had always been enough. The workshop settled into a stillness, broken only by the sound of the rain, the occasional crackle of the fire in the stove, and the gentle dripping of wax back into the pot as each taper was lifted. Time seemed to soften, to stretch, to become less a series of distinct moments and more a continuous stream, flowing quietly onward. Mr. Halbrook's hands moved through the wax and through the air, dipping and lifting, creating beauty through simple repetition. His shadow on the wall behind him moved in rhythm, a dark companion performing the same patient dance. And slowly, gradually, the candles approached completion, each one a small testament to the value of careful work, of attention paid, of craft honored. The rain continued to fall. The afternoon deepened, and in the warm, wax-scented workshop, an old man's hands continued their ancient work, as they had done yesterday, and the day before, and would do tomorrow and the day after that. Dip, lift, wait, dip, lift, wait. The rhythm of making, the rhythm of living, the rhythm of a life well spent in the quiet creation of light. Part 3. The Bell Above the Door. The bell above the shop door was a small brass thing, tarnished with age, but still possessed of a clear, sweet voice. Mr. Halbrook had hung it there himself when he was still a young man, newly inheriting the shop from his father, wanting to put his own small mark upon the place. Over the years, that bell had announced thousands of visitors, and its sound had become so woven into the fabric of his days that he sometimes heard it in his dreams. It rang now, just as he was hanging the finished tapers to complete their drying, its gentle chime cutting through the quiet of the late morning with a sound that was more greeting than interruption. Mr. Halbrook wiped his hands on his apron, though they were quite clean. This too was habit, and made his way from the workshop to the shop. Through the doorway he could see a figure silhouetted against the watery light from the window, a shape he recognized even before features became clear. "Good morning, Mrs. Ashworth," he said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. A wet day to be out and about. Ashworth was pushing back the hood of her cloak, revealing a face that bore its 70 years with grace, the lines around her eyes and mouth speaking of a life well lived and much smiled through. She was a small woman, neat in her movements, and she had been coming to Mr. Halbrook's shop every Tuesday morning for longer than either of them cared to precisely remember. "Good morning, Mr. Halbrook," she replied, her voice carrying the particular warmth reserved for old friends. Wet indeed, but one cannot let a little rain dictate one's schedule. The week would fall to pieces entirely if one did. She was the schoolteacher at St. Mary's, had been for 40 years, and she brought to all aspects of her life the same gentle discipline she brought to her classroom. Mr. Halbrook had always admired that about her, the way she moved through the world with purpose but without hurry, accomplishing much through steady application rather than dramatic effort. "I suspect your pupils were not quite so philosophical about the rain this morning," Mr. Halbrook said, moving to help her with her cloak. Mrs. Ashworth laughed softly. The younger ones arrived looking like a collection of drowned mice, all complaining most dramatically. But they settled soon enough once we began the day's lessons. Children are wonderfully resilient creatures, though they do enjoy a bit of theatrical suffering when the opportunity presents itself. She shook out her cloak and hung it on the peg by the door, where it began to drip quietly onto the stone floor. Mr. Halbrook made a mental note to put down a cloth later, though he suspected he would forget, as he always did, and simply wipe up the small puddle before closing for the evening. "I've come for my usual order," Mrs. Ashworth said, turning to survey the shelves with the air of one who has time to spare and intends to enjoy spending it, though I confess I'm in no great hurry. The children have their geography examination this afternoon, and Mr. Palmer is proctoring. I have a blessed hour of freedom before I need to return. "Then you must have tea," Mr. Halbrook said decisively. "The kettle is already hot, and I was just thinking how pleasant a cup would be." It was a small fiction. This, he had not been thinking of tea at all, but it was the sort of fiction that smoothed the social path, that allowed one to offer hospitality without making the other feel they were imposing. Mrs. Ashworth understood this perfectly well, and she smiled in acknowledgement of the gentle dance they were performing. "Tea would be most welcome," she said. "Thank you." Mr. Halbrook retreated to the small back room where he kept his personal things: a tin for tea, a small spirit kettle, 2 cups that had belonged to his mother, their porcelain so fine that light showed through when they were held up to a candle. He prepared the tea with the same careful attention he brought to his candle making, warming the pot, measuring the leaves, waiting for the water to reach the precise moment between boiling and cooling when tea was best made. When he returned to the shop, Mrs. Ashworth had settled herself on the chair he kept near the counter for those customers who wished to sit while they made their selections or discussed their orders. She had removed her gloves and was holding her hands out to the warmth radiating from the candles that burned throughout the shop. "It's always so wonderfully warm in here," she said, as he handed her a cup of tea. "Even on the coldest days, one steps through your door and feels immediately comforted." "Candlelight carries warmth in more ways than one," Mr. Halbrook said, settling himself on his stool. "Though I confess the shop does stay warmer than one might expect. The workshop especially, all that melted wax, all those small flames. It's quite pleasant in winter." They sipped their tea in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that can exist only between people who have known each other long enough that conversation is a choice rather than an obligation. Through the window, the rain continued its gentle percussion against the glass. The street outside was largely empty, only the occasional hurried figure passing by, head down against the weather. The world seemed to have drawn in upon itself, seeking shelter and warmth, content to wait out the rain in whatever safe harbor it could find. "I've been thinking about candlelight," Mrs. Ashworth said eventually, her voice reflective. "Teaching the children about the invention of the gas lamp last week, and of course, they find it all terribly exciting, this modern world of ours. But I found myself rather sad, thinking about what we're losing." Mr. Halbrook nodded slowly. He had thought similar thoughts many times, though he tried not to dwell on them overmuch. Progress was coming, as it always did, and one could not stop it any more than one could stop the rain or the turning of the seasons. "Candlelight has a quality to it," Mrs. Ashworth continued, "a gentleness that these bright gas flames lack. When I was a child, we read by candlelight every evening. My father would light the candles one by one, and it was like a signal. The day's work was done. The night's peace had begun. There was something sacred about it, I think, something that marked the transition from labor to rest. There is an honesty to candlelight," Mr. Halbrook said quietly. "It doesn't pretend to be stronger than it is. It illuminates what is near and leaves the far corners in shadow. It reminds us that we cannot see everything, know everything, control everything. And there is a comfort in that, I find. Ashworth looked at him with the expression of someone who has heard a truth they already knew but had not known how to articulate. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, exactly that." They sat together in the warm glow of the shop, two old friends sharing tea and thoughts, while outside the world rushed past in the rain. Here, time seemed to pool like candle wax, accumulating slowly, creating something solid and real from what had been liquid and formless. The children love candles. "Still," Mrs. Ashworth said after a moment, "at Christmas, when we light the ones on our classroom tree, they become quite reverent. Even the rowdiest boys fall silent. There's something about a candle flame that speaks to something deep in us, I think. Something ancient and essential." "Fire was our first technology," Mr. Halbrook observed. "Before tools, before language perhaps. The first thing we learned to carry with us, to create on demand. Light and warmth and safety, all in one small flame. We've been watching fires burn for as long as we've been human. It's no wonder it still speaks to us." "You're quite the philosopher, Mr. Halbrook," Mrs. Ashworth said with a gentle smile. "Not at all," he replied, a little embarrassed. "Merely an old man who has spent too much time alone with his thoughts and his candles. I think perhaps candles make philosophers of us all," Mrs. Ashworth said. "They burn quietly and steadily, and they invite us to do the same." The conversation drifted then to other matters: how the winter term was progressing, which students showed promise, how Mrs. Ashworth's sister in Durham was recovering from her illness. They spoke of the preparations being made for Christmas, of the decorations that would go up in the streets, of the services that would be held at the cathedral. Mr. Halbrook found himself mentioning, almost without meaning to, the candle on the high shelf, the one that burned longer than it ought. He had not spoken of it to anyone before, and he was surprised to hear the words coming from his own mouth. Mrs. Ashworth listened with interest, her head tilted slightly to one side, her expression thoughtful but not skeptical. "Perhaps," she said when he had finished, "it's the shop's way of holding on to something. Memory, maybe, or hope, or just the simple pleasure of burning a bit longer than expected." Mr. Halbrook considered this. "That's a nicer explanation than most I've considered." "Everything deserves a nice explanation if we can manage it," Mrs. Ashworth said firmly. "The world is mysterious enough without us making it darker than it needs to be." They finished their tea as the church bells tolled noon, the sound rolling across the rooftops and in through the shop window, marking the passage of time in that old familiar way that had been marking it since long before either of them had been born. Mrs. Ashworth rose, straightening her skirts and reaching for her gloves. "I suppose I must return to my duties. Mr. Palmer will be wondering where I've gotten to." "Your usual order?" Mr. Halbrook asked, standing as well. "Yes, please." The bell chimed as she left, its voice bright and clear. Through the window, Mr. Halbrook watched her make her way down the street, the parcel tucked under her arm, her step light despite the puddles. The shop seemed quieter after she had gone, but it was not an empty quiet. It was the quiet of a space that had just held friendship, that still bore the warmth of shared company. Mr. Halbrook collected the teacups and returned them to their shelf, then stood for a moment in the center of his shop, surrounded by candles, surrounded by light. Outside, the rain was indeed easing, and somewhere above the clouds, the winter sun was trying to break through. It was good. The proportions were correct. The painting was careful and precise. The whole piece had the quality of rightness that came when craft and care combined successfully. Some child would receive this theater and would put on plays with it, would create stories and performances, would populate its small stage with imagination and wonder. He set the theater aside to dry and cleaned his brushes carefully, washing away the paint with turpentine and then water, drying them on a soft cloth, returning them to their jar. The workbench was tidied, tools put away, surfaces wiped clean. The day's work was done. Mr. Bellamy stood in the center of his workshop, looking around at the space that had been the center of his life for so many years. The lamps cast their warm light across familiar surfaces. The fire had settled into a steady glow. The toys on their shelves waited patiently, and outside, beyond the windows, the night had fully arrived, wrapping the city in darkness, while here, in this small shop in Covent Garden, warmth and light persisted, a small refuge against the dark. He felt peaceful, content, ready for the evening's remaining hours and whatever they might bring. The day had been good, the work had been satisfying, and now the night was here, bringing with it the promise of rest and the certainty that tomorrow would bring another day, another morning, another opportunity to continue the quiet work of creating small vessels of joy from wood and paint and imagination. Part 8. A Visitor from Long Ago. The next afternoon brought with it a visitor that Mr. Bellamy had not expected, though in truth he welcomed very few visitors and expected even fewer. He was at his workbench, engaged in the delicate work of attaching the tiny brass hinges to a wooden music box, when he heard the soft tapping at his door. 3 gentle knocks, patient and unhurried. He set down his tools and rose, crossing the workshop to answer. When he opened the door, he found standing there an elderly woman, perhaps a few years younger than himself, dressed in clothing that spoke of genteel poverty, good fabric, and careful maintenance, but styles that were no longer quite fashionable, colors that had faded with many washings. Her face was deeply lined but kind, and her eyes held a quality of gentle determination mixed with uncertainty. "Mr. Bellamy?" she asked, her voice soft and cultured. "I hope I am not intruding. I wonder if I might speak with you for a few moments." "Of course," Mr. Bellamy said, stepping back to allow her entrance. "Please, do come in. How may I be of service to you?" The woman entered slowly, looking around the workshop with an expression that seemed to combine nostalgia with something approaching wonder. "It has been many years since I was last in this shop," she said quietly. "Many years indeed. I was not certain I would find it still here, still unchanged." Mr. Bellamy studied her face, trying to place her, but the memory would not come. "I apologize," he said. "I fear my memory is not what it once was. Have we met before?" "We have," the woman said, though it was a very long time ago. More than 20 years, I should think. "My name is Mary Thornton then. I am Mrs. Mary Ashford now, these past 15 years. But you would have known me as Mary Thornton." Mary Thornton. The name stirred something in Mr. Bellamy's memory, a distant recognition. And then, quite suddenly, understanding came. "You are the daughter of Mrs. Millicent Thornton," he said softly. "The first Mary." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "You remember?" she said, her voice touched with emotion. "After all these years, you remember." "I remember your mother bringing a doll to be repaired," Mr. Bellamy said. "A cloth doll in a blue dress. She said it had been yours when you were a child, and that your daughter, also named Mary, had inherited it and loved it dearly." Mrs. Ashford nodded, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes. That is right. My daughter Mary. She died when she was 8 years old, not long after my mother brought the doll here for repair. A fever that came suddenly and could not be broken. It has been more than 20 years now, but she paused, pressing her lips together, composing herself. Time softens the grief, but it never quite removes it. I am so very sorry, Mr. Bellamy said gently. Please, come and sit down. May I offer you some tea? Mrs. Ashford accepted gratefully, and Mr. Bellamy busied himself with preparing tea, while his visitor settled into the chair near the fire. As the water heated, he found himself thinking about the connections between the past and present, about how lives touched and separated, and sometimes, unexpectedly, touched again. When the tea was ready, he poured 2 cups and carried them to the fireside, settling into the second chair with a slight sigh of relief. His knees had been bothering him today, and sitting was more comfortable than standing. I have thought about this shop many times over the years, Mrs. Ashford said, accepting her tea with a small nod of thanks. After my daughter died, my mother brought the doll back to you. She could not bear to keep it, you see. Every time she saw it, she thought of Mary, and the pain was too great. She asked if you would keep it here, and you agreed, out of kindness. I have always remembered that kindness. It was a small thing, Mr. Bellamy said. Your mother was grieving. How could I refuse such a request? Many would have, Mrs. Ashford said, but you did not. And now, well, I have come to ask about the doll. My mother died 3 years ago, and before she passed, she spoke of it. She said she had been wrong to give it away, that it should have remained in the family, that it held too much memory to be abandoned. She asked me to try to retrieve it if it still existed. I know it is a great deal to ask after so many years, but I wondered. Mr. Bellamy set down his teacup and rose. He crossed to the shelf where the cloth doll stood beside his childhood soldier and carefully lifted it down. He carried it back to Mrs. Ashford and held it out to her. It is here, he said simply. It has been waiting. Mrs. Ashford took the doll with trembling hands, and the tears that had been gathering in her eyes spilled over. She held the doll close to her chest, much as a child might hold it, and wept quietly for several moments. Mr. Bellamy sat in respectful silence, allowing her the space to feel what she needed to feel. When she had composed herself, Mrs. Ashford looked at the doll more carefully, examining it as one might examine an old friend, not seen in many years. It is exactly as I remember, she said wonderingly. The blue dress, the painted face, the yarn hair. I made this doll myself, you know, when I was perhaps 14 or 15. I was learning to sew, and my mother suggested I make a doll as practice. I remember choosing the fabric for the dress, painting the face with such care, and then I gave it to my own daughter when she was small, and she loved it just as I had loved it. It shows the signs of much love, Mr. Bellamy said gently. That is the best thing one can say about a toy. Mrs. Ashford nodded, running her fingers over the doll's faded dress. I embroidered my initials on the back, she said. M.T. Mary Thornton, as I was then. I wanted to mark it as mine, to claim it somehow. How foolish and how young I was. We all wish to leave our mark, to say I was here, I made this, I mattered. There was nothing foolish in that. Mr. Bellamy walked her to the door, moving slowly, feeling the weight of the day and the years in his bones. At the threshold, Mrs. Ashford paused and turned to him. We live such brief lives, she said quietly, and yet the things we make, the love we give, these can endure. My mother made this doll for me. I gave it to my daughter. Now I give it to my granddaughter. And perhaps someday she will give it to her own daughter. The people may pass away, but the love remains, held in cloth and paint and memory." "That is a beautiful thought," Mr. Bellamy said. "I hope it proves true." They said their farewells, and Mr. Bellamy watched from the doorway as Mrs. Ashford made her way down the street, the basket with its precious contents held carefully in her hands. She walked slowly but with evident purpose, and he continued watching until she turned the corner and disappeared from view. He closed the door and returned to his workshop, feeling a mixture of emotions he could not quite name. Sadness for the loss of the doll, which had become a familiar presence during its years on his shelf, but also deep satisfaction that it was returning to the family that had created it, that it would know the hands of another child, that its story would continue. He looked at the shelf where the doll had stood, now holding only his childhood soldier. The soldier seemed somehow lonely without its companion, standing at attention in solitary vigil. Mr. Bellamy reached up and adjusted the soldier's position slightly, turning it so that it faced outward toward the workshop rather than toward the wall. "You are the keeper of memories now," he said softly to the small wooden figure. "You must remember for both of you." The afternoon continued its quiet progression toward evening, and Mr. Bellamy returned to his work, his hands taking up familiar tools, his mind holding gently the awareness that he had been witness to something significant, not grand or dramatic, but meaningful in the way that small acts of preservation and return are meaningful, in the way that connections across time and loss can sometimes be unexpectedly restored. Outside, the street grew gradually darker, the sounds of commerce fading into the quieter sounds of evening. Inside, the lamps burned steadily, the fire glowed in its grate, and the work continued, patient and unhurried, as it had for decades and would continue for as long as strength remained. Life moved in its cycles, loss and recovery, separation and reunion, endings and beginnings. And through it all, the small things persisted. A wooden soldier on a shelf, a cloth doll returning home, the steady work of hands creating toys for children who would love them, lose them, remember them, and perhaps, if fortune smiled, find them again when they were most needed. Part 9, Closing the Workshop. The evening had settled fully over Covent Garden by the time Mr. Bellamy began his preparations for closing the shop. The clock on the mantelpiece showed 7:30, and though there was work he could still do, there was also the recognition that his body was tired, that his eyes were growing weary from the close work of the day, that it was time to bring this day to its conclusion and allow himself the rest he had earned. He stood in the center of his workshop, looking around at the familiar space with the appreciation that comes from long association. The lamps cast their warm light across the workbench, across the shelves of toys, across the tools that hung on their pegs or rested in their designated places. Everything was much as it had been that morning, and yet subtly different. The work had progressed. Pieces had moved from one stage of completion to the next. The day had left its mark in small ways. Mr. Bellamy began with the fire, as he always did. It had burned low during the evening, and now consisted mostly of glowing coals and fine ash. He took the poker and carefully spread the coals evenly across the grate, then covered them with ash from the bucket, enough to bank the fire safely, to preserve a small core of heat that could be revived in the morning, but not so much as to completely smother it. The fire's light dimmed as he worked. the red glow gradually being obscured by the gray ash until only the faintest suggestion of warmth remained visible. Next, he turned his attention to his workbench. The music box he had been working on earlier lay there, its tiny brass hinges now properly attached, waiting only for its mechanism to be installed. He examined it once more in the lamplight, checking that the hinges moved smoothly, that the joints were secure, that everything was as it should be. Satisfied, he set it aside carefully, placing it on a shelf where it would be safe until he could return to it tomorrow. The rest of the workbench required tidying. He gathered the small brass screws that had not been used and returned them to their compartmented box. The screwdriver was wiped clean and returned to its place in the tool rack. The fine sandpaper he had used to smooth the wood around the hinges was folded neatly and set aside for future use. Each action was deliberate, unhurried, part of the ritual that marked the transition from work to rest. He moved methodically around the workshop, attending to each area in turn. The paintbrushes were checked to ensure they had been properly cleaned. He had washed them earlier, but it was his habit to check again, for a brush left with dried paint in its bristles was a brush ruined. He found them all clean and soft, standing in their jar like a small forest of wooden handles and fine bristles. The pots of paint were examined to ensure their lids were tight. He had learned long ago that paint left exposed to air would dry and become useless, and he was meticulous about sealing each pot after use. He found one lid that was slightly loose and tightened it, then arranged all the pots in their proper order on the shelf: reds and blues and yellows and greens and browns, each one labeled in his careful handwriting. The carving knives required special attention. Each one was examined for cleanliness, for any trace of wood sap or resin that might have accumulated on the blade. He found them all satisfactory, but he nevertheless wiped each one with a lightly oiled cloth, maintaining the steel, preventing rust, ensuring they would be ready when next he needed them. Then, each knife was returned to its place in the wooden rack, arranged by size and purpose, the way his father had taught him, the way his grandfather had taught his father. Mr. Bellamy swept the floor next, gathering the day's accumulation of wood shavings and sawdust into a small pile, then transferring this to the wooden box, where such things were kept. The shavings were soft and fragrant, carrying the scent of the various woods he had worked with: pine and basswood and cherry, each one contributing its own particular perfume to the mixture. He lifted a handful and let it fall back into the box, watching the way the curled shavings drifted and settled, light as paper, delicate as lace. When the floor was swept, he moved to the windows. The shutters had remained open during the evening, allowing him to see the darkening street, but now it was time to close them, to seal the workshop against the night. He unlatched each shutter and swung it inward, the hinges creaking slightly, a sound so familiar he hardly noticed it, yet comforting in its consistency. The shutters were heavy, made of solid wood, and they closed out the world effectively, reducing the workshop to its own private domain, dependent only on the light of its lamps. With the shutters closed and latched, the workshop felt smaller, more intimate, like a room in a house rather than a place of business. Mr. Bellamy stood for a moment in the changed atmosphere, appreciating this transformation, this sense of enclosure and safety. He began to extinguish the lamps, starting with the one farthest from the door and working his way forward. Each lamp required its own small ritual: the glass chimney to be lifted carefully, the wick to be lowered until the flame diminished and went out, the chimney to be replaced, the whole lamp to be left tidy for the morning. As each lamp was extinguished, the workshop grew dimmer, the shadows deepening. the pools of light becoming fewer and smaller. He left one lamp burning, the one nearest the door, and by its light he made a final circuit of the workshop, checking that everything was in order, that nothing had been overlooked. His eyes moved over the shelves of toys, each one standing or sitting in its place, patient and still. The rocking horse with its real horsehair mane, the set of 9 pins painted in bright colors, the Noah's Ark with its procession of tiny animals, the soldiers in their formation, the dolls in their various dresses. His gaze came to rest on the shelf where his childhood soldier stood alone now, the cloth doll having been reclaimed by its family. The soldier seemed to stand even more at attention than usual, bearing its solitude with dignity. Mr. Bellamy reached up and touched the small wooden figure gently, just for a moment, a gesture of acknowledgement and affection. "Good night, old friend," he said softly. "Stand watch over the others while I am upstairs." He moved to his desk and checked his account book, ensuring that the day's transactions had been properly recorded. There had been few. A customer had collected a repaired top in the morning, and another had commissioned a set of building blocks to be completed by next week. But each was noted in his careful handwriting, with the date and details and amounts. The ledger was closed and returned to its drawer. The cash box was checked, the day's modest receipts counted and found correct. He locked the box and placed it in the drawer of his desk, then locked the drawer itself, tucking the small key into his waistcoat pocket, where it lived alongside his watch. Everything was attended to now. Everything was in order. The workshop was ready for the night, prepared to rest until morning should call it back to wakefulness. At the top of the stairs, he paused and looked back down at the closed door of his workshop. Behind that door, the toys waited in darkness. The fire held its small core of warmth. The day's work stood ready for tomorrow's continuation. All was well. All was as it should be. Mr. Arthur Bellamy turned away from the stairs and moved toward his rooms, towards supper and reading, and eventually sleep, carrying with him the quiet contentment of honest work, completed, of tools properly tended, of a workshop left in perfect order, ready to receive the gift of another morning when it should come. Mary, the woman had said, "My daughter was Mary, and now my granddaughter is called Mary as well, after her." The doll has been Mary's companion through 2 generations. I know it is not a valuable piece, Mr. Bellamy, but it is precious to us. Could you restore it, do you think? Bellamy sat very still, the memory crystallizing. Yes, he had taken the doll and had repaired it, had mended the torn dress, had resecured the loose yarn, had touched up the faded paint on the face. He had done the work carefully, with full attention, treating the old doll with the same respect he would have given a much finer piece, because he had understood that its value lay not in its monetary worth, but in its history, in the love it had received and continued to receive. And when the woman had returned to collect it, she had been so pleased, so grateful. She had insisted on paying him more than he had asked, though he had protested that the work had been simple and had required only an hour or 2 of his time. "My granddaughter will be so happy," the woman had said, tears in her eyes. "This doll is her dearest friend. She takes it everywhere, tells it all her secrets. It was breaking my heart to see it falling to pieces. You have given us such a gift, Mr. Bellamy." But then, what had happened? Why was the doll here in his workshop rather than with the granddaughter who loved it? Mr. Bellamy frowned, trying to remember. The woman had taken the doll when she left. He was certain of that. He could remember wrapping it carefully in brown paper, handing it to her, watching her smile as she held the package. And yet, here it was, years later, discovered on a dusty shelf in the back of his workshop. He rose and went to the small desk where he kept his account books, ledgers recording every commission, every repair, every sale going back decades. He found the volume that covered the period his memory suggested, perhaps 15 or 20 years ago, and began to page through it, looking for any mention of a dull repair, any notation that might illuminate this mystery. There, an entry from April of 1868, nearly 25 years ago. Repair of cloth doll, requested by Mrs. Millicent Thornton. Mending of dress, re-securing of hair, touching up of paint. Fee, 1 shilling, paid upon collection. Mrs. Millicent Thornton, M.T., the initials on the doll's back. So the doll had belonged not to the daughter or granddaughter, but to Mrs. Thornton herself, and she had embroidered her own initials there, marking it as hers. But that still did not explain why the doll was here. The ledger clearly indicated that Mrs. Thornton had collected and paid for the repair. Unless Mr. Bellamy turned the page and found another entry dated several weeks later. Mrs. Thornton returned. Brings doll again. Granddaughter has passed away. Asks if I might keep the doll here. Cannot bear to see it. No charge. The granddaughter, the second Mary, had died, and Mrs. Thornton, in her grief, had been unable to keep the doll that had been her granddaughter's companion. She had brought it back to him, asked him to keep it, and he, understanding something of grief and loss, had agreed. He must have placed it on that upper shelf, meaning to find a proper place for it later. And then the years had passed, and he had forgotten, and the doll had remained there, waiting patiently in the darkness, holding its memories close. Mr. Bellamy sat down slowly, still holding the doll, feeling a great sadness wash over him. 2 generations of Marys, the mother who had died and the granddaughter who had followed her too soon. And this small cloth doll, passed from one to the other, had been witness to both their lives and both their deaths, had been loved by both, had provided comfort to both. And now it was here, in his hands, still patient, still gentle, still holding in its worn fabric all those years of love and loss. He looked at the doll's painted face and thought about the impermanence of life, about how people passed through this world so briefly, while the objects they loved might endure long after they were gone. This doll had outlasted both the Marys who had loved it. It might outlast Mrs. Thornton as well, if she still lived. It might outlast him, Mr. Bellamy, sitting here in his workshop contemplating the strange persistence of things. But there was comfort in that persistence too, he thought. The doll carried within it the love it had received. It was not merely cloth and paint and yarn. It was a repository of affection, a witness to tenderness, a small monument to the fact that these 2 girls had lived and had been loved, even if their time had been brief. Mr. Bellamy rose and moved to the shelf where his own childhood soldiers stood at attention. Carefully, gently, he placed the cloth doll beside the soldier, 2 old toys standing together, 2 small vessels of memory, keeping each other company. There, he said softly, though there was no one to hear him. You need not be alone in the darkness any longer. The afternoon light was fading now, the workshop growing dimmer. Mr. Bellamy lit another lamp and returned to his reorganizing. But his movements were slower now, more thoughtful. Each toy he handled seemed to carry its own story, its own history, and he treated each one with new reverence, understanding more fully than ever before that he was not merely a maker of toys, but a keeper of memories, a guardian of small objects that held within them the joys and sorrows of those who had loved them. The work continued into the early evening, quiet and meditative. While outside the market closed for the day and the streets grew gradually quieter, and the doll and the soldier stood together on their shelf, two old friends reunited, bearing witness to the gentle passage of time. Part 6. Stories Carved in Wood. The discovery of the cloth doll had stirred something in Mr. Bellamy's mind, and in the days that followed, he found himself thinking often about the lives of toys, not their physical existence, but the invisible histories they carried, the stories they witnessed, the affections they absorbed and held within themselves like vessels holding water. It was a gray morning, some 3 days after he had found the doll, and Mr. Bellamy sat at his workbench, not working but simply sitting, his hands resting quietly on the scarred wood surface, his mind wandering through thoughts that felt both melancholy and strangely peaceful. The shop was not yet fully open. The door remained closed, the lamps burned low, and he had allowed himself this quiet time to think, to remember, to contemplate the nature of the work to which he had devoted his life. He looked around at the shelves that lined his workshop, at the hundreds of toys that waited there in various stages of completion or readiness for sale. Each one, he thought, would eventually find its way into the hands of a child. Each one would become part of someone's story, someone's childhood, someone's memories. Some of these toys would be treasured, would be carried everywhere, would be confided in and cared for and loved with the fierce devotion that children bring to their favorite possessions. Others would be played with casually, enjoyed, but not particularly cherished, and eventually forgotten or passed along to younger siblings, or discarded when the child grew older and put away childish things. And a very few, like the cloth doll that now stood beside his childhood soldier on the upper shelf, would transcend their simple material nature and become something more. Repositories of love, so deep that they could not be parted with even in grief. Witnesses to lives lived and lost, small anchors of memory in the rushing stream of time. Mr. Bellamy rose and went to stand before the shelf where the doll and the soldier kept their patient vigil. He did not touch them, merely stood looking at them, these two old toys that had outlasted so much, that had endured while the children who loved them had grown or died, while the world had changed around them. His soldier, carved by his father's hands more than 60 years ago, painted in colors that had faded from bright to muted, one arm raised in perpetual salute. What memories did it hold? It had been witness to his entire childhood, had been present for both joys and sorrows, had been clutched in small hands during illnesses, and carried in pockets during explorations of the neighborhood. It had been there the day his father taught him to carve his first piece of wood, had been there the night his mother died, had been there through all the seasons of his growing up, and now it stood here, a silent witness to his old age, to his continuing work in this same workshop where it had been created. If it could speak, what stories would it tell? What would it say about the boy who had carried it everywhere, who had made it the hero of countless imaginary adventures, who had eventually grown into a man and become a maker of toys himself, creating for other children the same kinds of companions he himself had treasured? The cloth doll beside it held different stories, stories Mr. Bellamy could only partly know. It had belonged to a woman named Millicent Thornton, had been passed to her daughter Mary, and then to her granddaughter, also Mary. 3 generations of hands had held it. 3 sets of eyes had looked into its painted face. 3 hearts had opened to it in trust and affection. The first Mary, the mother, would have been born perhaps in the 1820s or 1830s. Mr. Bellamy could not be certain of the dates. She would have grown up in a world different from the one he now inhabited, a world without railways or telegraphs, a world where London was smaller and the countryside came closer to the city's edges. She would have carried this doll through her childhood, would have perhaps confided to it her hopes and fears, her small triumphs and disappointments. And then she had grown, had married perhaps, had borne a daughter, and had passed the doll along, saying, "This was mine when I was your age. I want you to have it now." The second Mary, the granddaughter, had lived in more recent times. Her childhood would have overlapped with Mr. Bellamy's adulthood. She would have known a world of gas lamps and horse-drawn omnibuses, of growing cities and increasing industry. She would have held this same doll, would have dressed and undressed it, would have tucked it into bed beside her at night, and then she had died. Mr. Bellamy did not know the circumstances, whether it had been illness or accident, whether it had been sudden or lingering, and the doll had survived her, had outlasted the young life that had loved it. Standing there in the quiet morning light, Mr. Bellamy found himself thinking about the strange relationship between things and time, about how objects persist while lives are so brief. A toy made from wood and cloth and paint could last for generations if cared for properly, could be passed from hand to hand, could accumulate layers of meaning and memory, like a stone gathering moss. Was there something sad in this, or something beautiful? He could not quite decide. Both, perhaps. Sad because it was a reminder of mortality, of the fact that all people pass away while the things they made or owned endure. Beautiful because it meant that love could be preserved, that the care someone invested in an object could continue to resonate long after they were gone. He thought about all the toys he had made over the decades of his working life. Where were they now? Some would have been destroyed, certainly, broken beyond repair, damaged by fire or water, simply worn out by intensive play. But others would still exist somewhere, in attics or cupboards, on shelves or in trunks. And a few, perhaps, were still being played with, had been passed down from parent to child, were still providing comfort and companionship to a new generation. The thought pleased him, to imagine that somewhere in London or beyond, a child might be playing with a toy he had carved 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, might be finding the same kind of joy in it that the original owner had found. There was something deeply satisfying in that idea. Mr. Bellamy moved to the window and looked out at the street, which was beginning to show signs of morning activity. A milk cart passed by, the horses' hooves making their familiar clip-clop rhythm on the cobblestones. A lamplighter was extinguishing the gas lamps, moving from post to post with his long pole. A few early pedestrians hurried past, shoulders hunched against the cold. All of these people had been children once. All of them had played with toys, had loved or at least enjoyed some object that had been special to them in their youth. And where were those toys now? Forgotten, most likely. Discarded, or lost, or destroyed by time and circumstance. But the memories remained, perhaps. Even if the physical object was gone, even if a person could not recall the exact appearance of their favorite toy, there might still be a residual feeling, a warmth associated with play and imagination, and the freedom of childhood. And if that were so, then perhaps the toys had fulfilled their purpose, had given what they were meant to give, even if they had not physically endured. Mr. Bellamy thought about the little girl Annie Fletcher, who had come to his shop several days earlier and had purchased the small brown horse for her ailing brother. Where was that horse now? Being clutched in a sick child's hands, perhaps. Being galloped across rumpled bedclothes. Carrying an imaginary rider to imaginary destinations. Providing comfort and distraction to a boy who was confined to bed and could not run and play as he wished. That toy would accumulate its own history, would become part of that child's story. And someday, when the boy was grown, he might remember it, might recall the day his sister brought it to him, might remember the adventures he had imagined for it, might feel a distant echo of the comfort it had provided during a difficult time. This was the true value of toys, Mr. Bellamy thought. Not their monetary worth, not the skill required to make them, but their capacity to serve as companions, as catalysts for imagination, as anchors for memory. They were small vessels into which children could pour their affections, their dreams, their need for something to love and care for. He returned to his workbench and sat down, his hands coming to rest on the piece of wood he had been carving the previous afternoon. A bear's head, still rough, requiring much more work before it would be ready for painting. He picked up his carving knife, but did not immediately begin to work. Instead, he held it quietly, thinking about all the toys this knife had helped to create over the years. All the small wooden forms it had helped to coax forth from blocks of lime or cherry or oak. His father's hands had guided this knife before his own. His father had carved with it, had shaped toy after toy, had invested each one with care and attention. And now Mr. Bellamy's hands performed the same work, following the same principles, creating for a new generation of children the same kinds of companions his father had created for an earlier generation. There was comfort in this continuity, in being part of a tradition that stretched backward and forward through time. He was not merely an individual craftsman working in isolation. He was a link in a chain, receiving skills and knowledge from those who had come before and passing them on, if only through the toys themselves, to those who would come after. What would become of his workshop when he was gone? He had no children to inherit it, no apprentice to carry on the work. Likely the shop would be cleared out, his tools sold or discarded, his remaining stock of toys distributed somehow. The building would be taken over by some other business, and the long history of toy making in this location would come to an end. The thought saddened him, but only mildly. Everything ended eventually. Workshops closed, traditions faded, skills were lost or transformed. This was the nature of time, of change, of the world's constant movement forward. He had done his work, had made his toys, had contributed what he could contribute. That would have to be enough. And yet, some of his toys would survive him, would continue to exist and be played with and loved. In that sense, something of him would persist. Not his name, perhaps, not his identity, but his care, his craftsmanship, the love he had invested in his work. These things would endure in the toys themselves, invisible but present, a kind of gift given to children he would never meet, in times he would never see. Mr. Bellamy lifted his knife and began to work on the bear's head, the blade moving in its familiar rhythms, the wood shavings beginning to accumulate on the bench before him. As he carved, his mind grew quiet, focused on the immediate task, on the feel of the wood and the angle of the blade. But beneath that focused attention, beneath the conscious thought required by the work, there ran a current of deeper feeling, a sense of connection to all the other toy makers who had ever lived. All the other craftspeople who had devoted their lives to creating things of beauty and utility for others, he was not alone. Even in his solitary workshop, he was part of something larger, something that transcended individual lives and connected hands across time. The morning light grew gradually brighter, the street sounds increased, the day began in earnest, and Mr. Arthur Bellamy worked on, his hands shaping wood, his mind holding gently the awareness of memory and meaning, creating with patience and care the small wooden companions that would carry forward, in their quiet way, into an unknown future. He kept his starter in a cupboard crock on the shelf above the work table, where the warmth rising from the oven below would keep it content. It was descended from a starter his master had given him when he was a young apprentice decades ago. And that starter had come from his master's master before that. How many generations of bakers it had fed, Mr. Alderwick could not say, but he cared for it as tenderly as one might care for any living thing, feeding it regularly, never allowing it to grow too cold or too warm. He added a spoonful to the flour and water and began to knead. His hands moved in the ancient rhythm, pushing the dough away, folding it back, turning it a quarter turn, pushing again. The motion was so familiar that he need not think about it. His hands knew the work better than his mind ever could. The dough was cool at first, slightly sticky, but as he worked it, it began to change. It grew smoother, more elastic, taking on that peculiar life that good dough possesses. The bakery filled with the gentle sounds of morning work, the soft slap of dough against wood, the quiet crackle of the fire, the occasional settling creak of the old building finding its shape for the new day. Through the window, the fog was beginning to thin ever so slightly, and the darkness was perhaps a shade less absolute than it had been. Mr. Alderwick shaped the first batch of dough into rounds and set them on the wooden board to rest. He covered them with a clean cloth, one that had been his wife's, though she had been gone these 5 years now, and left them to their quiet work of rising. Then he began the second batch. This one was different, though he could not have said precisely how. It was something he had noticed only in recent weeks, a loaf that seemed to rise differently than the others. That took on a slightly different character, though he used the same flour, the same water, the same hands to knead it. He could not explain it, and so he did not try. In 40-some years of baking, he had learned that bread possessed its own mysteries, and that these mysteries were not meant to be entirely solved, but rather respected and observed. He mixed this batch as he mixed all others, adding perhaps a touch more attention, a slightly gentler hand, as one might handle something fragile and precious. The dough came together beautifully, smooth and soft, and when he shaped it and set it beside the others, it seemed to glow slightly in the lamplight, though that was surely only a trick of the shadows. The oven was ready now, its heat steady and true. He tested it by holding his hand near the opening, not too hot, not too cool, but perfect for the slow, even baking that would give the loaves their golden crust and tender crumb. But it was not yet time to bake. The dough must rest, must undergo its quiet transformation from mere ingredients into something that would warm bodies and fill bellies throughout the day. Mr. Alderwick swept the work table with a small brush, watching the flour dust drift and settle. He wiped his hands on his apron, a gesture so automatic that he was hardly aware of making it. And then, because there was time before the baking would begin, he did what he often did in these quiet morning moments. He simply stood in his bakery with the warmth of the oven at his back and the coming day somewhere beyond the window, still gathering itself for arrival. The fog outside seemed to be glowing now, touched by the first hint of dawn that had not yet revealed itself, but was certainly approaching. Soon, the street would wake. Soon, the first customers would arrive. Soon, the day would begin its full march forward. But for now, there was only this: warmth and quiet, and the soft breathing of rising dough. And Mr. Thomas Alderwick, baker of Pudding Lane, stood in the golden lamplight and felt, as he did each morning, that he was precisely where he belonged. The loaves rested beneath their cloth, rising slowly, gradually, taking their time, as all good things do. Part 2, Flour and Quiet Hands. The dough beneath Mr. Alderwick's hands had begun its slow transformation. He had set aside the mysterious loaf and returned to the familiar work of the morning's main batch. 6 rounds of dough that would become the bread for the day's customers. They lay before him on the worn wooden table, still covered by the cloth, but he could sense their progress even without seeing them. A baker learns to know such things the way a gardener knows when seeds have taken root beneath the soil, invisible but certain. He lifted the corner of the cloth and peered beneath. Yes, they had risen nicely in the warmth of the bakery, swelling gently, their surfaces now smooth and taut as a baby's skin. He touched one lightly with a flour-dusted finger, and the dough yielded slightly, then slowly pushed back, that particular resilience that told him they were ready for the next stage of their journey. But first, there was more needing to be done. Mr. Alderwick had learned long ago that bread could not be rushed. It required time and patience, and above all, it required the steady, rhythmic work of human hands. Machines might mix and pummel dough more quickly. He had seen such contraptions at the great commercial bakeries that had begun to appear in London, but they could not feel what the dough needed, could not sense the subtle differences in texture that told a true baker when to stop or when to continue. He dusted the table with fresh flour, the white powder settling in a fine cloud that caught the lamplight and made the air shimmer momentarily. The gesture was automatic, performed thousands upon thousands of times over the years, until it had become less a conscious action than a kind of breathing, necessary, rhythmic, essential. Taking the first round of dough, he placed it on the floured surface and began to work it once more. His hands pressed down and forward, the heels of his palms finding the center of the mass and pushing it away from himself. The dough stretched and flattened under the pressure. Then he gathered it back with his fingers, folding it over itself, turning it a quarter turn to the right, and pressing again. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. The rhythm was as old as bread itself, unchanged since the first baker had discovered that working the dough in this particular way made it lighter, stronger, better able to hold the air that the yeast would create. The bakery was very quiet now, save for these sounds: the soft slap of dough against wood, the faint creak of the table as he leaned his weight against it, the ever-present whisper of the fire in the oven behind him. Outside, the fog still clung to Pudding Lane, though the darkness had retreated somewhat. The sky beyond the window was no longer black, but rather a deep dark blue, like ink diluted with water, the color that comes just before true dawn. Mr. Alderwick's hands moved steadily, without hurry, without hesitation. The dough began to change beneath his touch. At first, it had been merely pliable, but now it was becoming something more. The gluten strands were aligning, forming an invisible network throughout the mass, giving it structure and strength. He could feel this happening, could sense the way the dough was becoming more elastic, more alive. When he pressed it now, it pushed back more firmly. When he stretched it, it resisted more strongly before yielding. This was the mystery and the magic of bread making. This transformation of simple ingredients into something greater than the sum of their parts. Flour, water, salt, yeast, nothing more than that. And yet, in the hands of a skilled baker, they became something that could sustain life, could warm bellies, could bring comfort on cold mornings. His fingers were white with flour dust that had worked its way into every crease and line. Beneath his nails, in the whorls of his fingerprints, coating the fine hairs on the backs of his hands, flour was everywhere, and he had long ago ceased to notice it. It was simply part of him, as much as his own skin. He thought, as he often did while kneading, of his apprentice days. He had been 14 years old when he had first stood at a baker's table, terrified and eager in equal measure. His master then had been a man named Bartholomew Price, a formidable figure with arms like hams and a voice that could shake the rafters when he was displeased. But his hands, when they guided young Thomas through the motions of kneading, had been surprisingly gentle. "Feel it, boy," Mr. Price had said, placing Thomas's small hands on the dough and covering them with his own enormous ones, guiding them through the rhythm. "Don't just move your arms like you're pumping water from a well. Feel what the dough is telling you. It will speak if you learn to listen." At first, Thomas had not understood. Dough could not speak. It was merely flour and water, inert and silent. But Mr. Price had been patient, and gradually, over weeks and months and years, Thomas had begun to understand. The dough did speak in its own wordless language. It told him when it needed more water, when it had been worked enough, when it was ready to rest, when it was ready to bake. Now, 40-some years later, his own hands were as skilled as Mr. Price's had been. More skilled, perhaps, for he had been kneading dough nearly every day of his life since that first apprentice morning. His hands knew this work the way a bird knows flight, not through conscious thought, but through something deeper, something written into the very muscles and bones. He finished with the first round and set it aside, covering it again with the cloth. Then he took the second round and began again. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. The lamplight flickered slightly as a draft found its way through some gap in the old building. The flame steadied itself and continued to burn, casting Mr. Alderwick's shadow large against the far wall, where it moved in time with his kneading, a dark, gentle giant dancing slowly. The texture of the dough was perfect now. When he pressed a finger into it, the indentation remained for a moment, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to fill back in. Like memory, he thought, like the way sorrow, pressed into the heart, eventually softens and fades, though it never entirely disappears. He did not often think in such poetic terms, but sometimes, in these quiet morning hours, thoughts came to him that would never have occurred in the bustle of the day. Perhaps it was the solitude, or the meditative rhythm of the work, or simply the peaceful hour before the world fully woke. Whatever the cause, he found a certain comfort in these small contemplations. Third round now, his hands reached for it automatically, placed it on the table, began the familiar motion. The flour dust continued to rise and fall with each movement, creating tiny galaxies of white particles that swirled in the lamplight. Some settled on his apron, on his forearms, on the edge of the table. Some drifted away and settled on the floor, where they would join the accumulated dust of countless other mornings. ground finer and finer by his footsteps, until they became part of the very substance of the bakery itself. There was something deeply satisfying about the repetition in a world that changed constantly, where buildings were torn down and rebuilt, where people came and went, where even the course of the Thames itself had been altered by the great works of engineers. This remained constant. Bread was made the same way today as it had been made 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. The same ingredients, the same movements, the same patience required. Mr. Alderwick found great comfort in this continuity. He had never been a man who sought novelty or excitement. Even as a young man, he had preferred the steady, predictable rhythm of the baker's life to the adventures that some of his companions had sought. While they had gone off to sea, or joined the army, or tried their fortunes in the new industries that were transforming England, he had remained in London, had learned his trade thoroughly, had eventually taken over this small shop on Pudding Lane when Mr. Price had retired, and he had been happy, was still happy even in his solitude. The fourth round received the same careful attention as the first three. His arms were beginning to feel the pleasant warmth of exertion, not exhaustion, for he was still strong despite his years, but the good, honest tiredness that came from useful work. His shoulders, too, felt the gentle pull of muscles being used, the satisfaction of the body doing what it was meant to do. Outside, the first bird began to sing, a blackbird, by the sound of it, greeting the coming dawn with its liquid, fluting notes. Others would join it soon, the sparrows with their cheerful chirping, the pigeons with their soft cooing, the occasional cry of a gull that had wandered inland from the river. But for now, just the one blackbird and the sound of kneading. Fifth round. The dough was becoming almost silky now under his hands, the surface so smooth that it reflected the lamplight with a subtle sheen. This was how it should be, this perfect balance of structure and softness, of strength and yielding. He could shape it into anything now, rounds or loaves or the plaited bread that some customers preferred for special occasions. But today, simple rounds, honest, straightforward loaves that would serve their purpose without pretension. He thought of the people who would eat this bread, the postman who came every morning for a small loaf to share with his tea, the seamstress from 2 streets over who always bought 2 rounds on Mondays to last her through the week, the young clerk who worked at the shipping office and who always seemed perpetually hungry, buying a large loaf that he would tuck under his arm and carry away with evident satisfaction. They relied on him, these regular customers, not in any grand or dramatic way, but in the small, steady way that people rely on the predictable comforts of their daily lives. He provided them with bread, and in doing so, he provided them with something more, with continuity, with reliability, with the knowledge that some things remained constant. Sixth and final round. He gave it the same care as all the others, neither rushing because it was the last, nor dawdling because there was no urgency. Each loaf deserved the full measure of his skill and attention. Each loaf would nourish someone, would become part of their body, would give them strength for their day's work. It was a responsibility he had never taken lightly. When the 6th round was properly kneaded, he set it with the others and covered them all again. They would rest now for a time, would continue their slow rising in the warmth of the bakery, and then he would shape them for the final time and slide them into the oven. Mr. Alderwick straightened slowly, feeling the pleasant stretch in his back. He flexed his fingers, dusted his hands together, sending up a small cloud of flour, and looked at his work. 6 rounds of dough rising peacefully beneath their cloth covering, and beyond them, set slightly apart, the mysterious 7th loaf, the one that rose differently, that seemed to glow in the lamplight. He did not touch it yet. It was not ready, somehow. He could sense this, though he could not have explained how he knew. So he left it there and turned his attention to other things. There was the floor to sweep, and the counter to wipe down, and the shelves to prepare for the day's baking. There was always work to be done in a bakery, always some small task waiting. But his hands, as he reached for the broom, still held the memory of the dough, still felt the gentle resistance, the slow yielding, the ancient rhythm. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. The rhythm of bread and of life and of quiet morning hours when the world held its breath before beginning again. "Come in, please," Mr. Bellamy said, stepping back and gesturing into the shop. "It is too cold to stand about in doorways. Come in where it is warm, and you can tell me what you need." The girl entered slowly, her eyes growing wide as she took in the shelves of toys surrounding her on all sides. She turned in a slow circle, looking up and around, clearly overwhelmed by the abundance of carved and painted wonders. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and she seemed almost afraid to move, as if worried that she might accidentally damage something. "Have you been to my shop before?" Mr. Bellamy asked, returning to his work stool but remaining attentive to his small visitor. The girl shook her head. "No, sir, but I have looked in the window many times. When my mother sends me to the market for vegetables, I always walk this way so I can see the toys. They are very beautiful, sir." "That is kind of you to say," Mr. Bellamy replied. "What is your name, my dear?" "Annie, sir." "Annie Fletcher." "Well, Miss Annie Fletcher, I am Mr. Bellamy, and I am very pleased to make your acquaintance. Now, you were about to ask me something when you were at the door. What was it you wished to know?" Annie's hands twisted together nervously. "I wanted to know, sir, how much a toy would cost. Just a small toy, nothing fine. Only I have been saving my pennies, and I thought perhaps I might have enough." Mr. Bellamy regarded her with gentle attention. "That depends on the toy, of course. Different toys cost different amounts. But tell me, is this toy for yourself or for someone else?" "For my brother, sir," Annie said, her voice becoming slightly stronger now that she was speaking of her purpose. "He is only 4, and he has been poorly this winter. A cough that will not leave him. The doctor says he must stay indoors and rest. But he gets so restless and unhappy. I thought if he had a toy, something to play with and imagine with, it might help him pass the time more cheerfully." "I see," Mr. Bellamy said, nodding slowly. "That is very thoughtful of you, to think of your brother's happiness. What sort of toy were you considering?" Annie looked around at the shelves, clearly overwhelmed by the choices. "I do not know, sir. Something simple that he could hold in his hands and carry about. He likes animals especially. We saw a horse once when we went to the country to visit our aunt, and he talked of it for weeks afterward." Bellamy rose and moved to one of the shelves, considering the various toys displayed there. "How many pennies have you managed to save?" he asked. Annie reached into her pocket and produced a small cloth purse, which she opened carefully. She counted the coins onto her palm. 7 pence, sir," she said, a note of pride in her voice. "I have been saving for 2 months. I help the greengrocer's wife on Saturday mornings, carrying bundles for the customers, and she gives me 2 each time. And I found a penny in the street once. 7 pence. It was not very much, Mr. Bellamy knew. Most of his toys sold for considerably more. the simpler ones for a shilling or 18 pence, the more elaborate ones for several shillings or even more. But he also knew what it meant for a child to save tuppence at a time, to guard those coins carefully and resist the temptation to spend them on sweets or small treats. He scanned the shelves, looking for something appropriate. His eye fell on a small carved horse that he had made some weeks earlier. It was a simple piece, carved from pine, painted brown with a black mane and tail, standing perhaps 4 inches high. He had made it as a practice piece while working out the proportions for a larger commission. And it had no particular destination. The work was good, the proportions were correct, but it was indeed simple compared to some of his more elaborate pieces. He took it down and examined it, turning it in his hands. Yes, this would do nicely. It was small enough for a young child to hold easily, sturdy enough to withstand rough play, and the workmanship was sound even if the design was plain. "What about this?" he asked, showing it to Annie. "Do you think your brother might like it?" Annie's face transformed, lighting with delight. She reached out tentatively, and Mr. Bellamy placed the horse in her hands. She held it carefully, reverently, examining it from all angles. "Oh," she breathed, "it is perfect, sir. It is exactly like the horse we saw. He will love it, I know he will." But her expression fell slightly. "How much does it cost, sir?" Mr. Bellamy appeared to consider the question carefully, though in truth, he had already made his decision. "Well," he said slowly, "it is a simple piece, as you can see. Not as elaborate as some of my work. I should think 7 pence would be a fair price for such a toy." Annie's eyes widened. "Truly, sir? You would sell it for exactly what I have?" "I would indeed," Mr. Bellamy said. "It seems to me that a toy is worth exactly what someone is willing to pay for it. And you have clearly worked hard to save your 7 pence. That makes the horse worth precisely that amount." Annie's eyes had become bright with tears that she was clearly fighting to hold back. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you so very much. You are very kind." She counted out her 7 coins onto the workbench, placing each one carefully as if it were something precious. Mr. Bellamy accepted them and placed them in his cash box, then took a piece of brown paper and wrapped the horse carefully, tying it with string. "There," he said, handing her the package. "That should keep it safe on your journey home. Give your brother my best wishes for a swift recovery, and tell him that this horse is very brave and will go on many adventures with him." Annie clutched the package to her chest, her face glowing with happiness. "I will, sir. I will tell him he is going to be so pleased. He has been so sad, lying in bed day after day. This will cheer him. I know it will." She moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Sir, you are the kindest man I have ever met. When I am grown and have money of my own, I shall come back and buy more toys from you, the finest ones you have, and I shall give them to children who need them. I promise." Mr. Bellamy felt a warmth spread through his chest, a tightness in his throat. "That is a fine ambition, Miss Fletcher. I hope you will be able to fulfill it. But for now, hurry home to your brother. The day is cold, and you should not be out longer than necessary." Annie nodded and slipped out the door, but not before favoring him with one more brilliant smile. He watched through the window as she walked away down the street, the wrapped package held carefully in both hands, her step considerably lighter than it had been when she arrived. When she had disappeared around the corner, Mr. Bellamy returned to his workbench and opened the cash box, looking at the 7 pennies Annie had given him. They represented 2 months of Saturday morning labor, of carrying bundles and being patient with demanding customers, of resisting the temptation to spend the slowly accumulating coins. They represented his sister's love for her ailing brother, a desire to bring comfort and joy to someone who was suffering. He closed the cash box and returned to his painting, but his mind was not on the yellow duck before him. He was thinking, instead of a small boy lying in bed, coughing and restless and unhappy, and of the moment when his sister would return home and present him with the wrapped package, of the joy that would light his face when he unwrapped it and saw the little brown horse, of the adventures they would have together, galloping across the blankets, jumping over pillows, racing to imaginary destinations. The horse had cost Mr. Bellamy perhaps an hour of his time to carve and paint, and the materials were worth only a few pennies at most. But to that boy, to his sister, it would be worth considerably more. It would be a companion, a spark for imagination, a small bright point of happiness in what had been a difficult winter. This was why he made toys, Mr. Bellamy thought. Not for the money, though he needed to earn enough to live. Not for the recognition, though it was pleasant when his work was appreciated. He made toys because they mattered, because they brought joy to children, because they opened doorways to imaginary worlds where anything was possible, where small boys could be brave riders and little girls could be fairy queens, where the ordinary constraints of life fell away and wonder took their place. His father had understood this. "We are not merely making objects," his father had told him long ago. "We are making possibilities. We are making dreams that children can hold in their hands." At the time, Mr. Bellamy had been young and had not fully grasped the depth of this statement. But now, after a lifetime of making toys, of seeing the faces of children light up with joy, of hearing reports of imaginary adventures in make-believe worlds, he understood. Each toy was a small gift of possibility, a key that unlocked imagination, a companion for the long journey of childhood. The morning wore on, and Mr. Bellamy returned to his work with renewed purpose. He finished the yellow duck and set it aside to dry, then began work on a new project, a simple doll carved from basswood. As he worked, his hands moving with practiced certainty, he found himself humming quietly a tune from his own childhood that he could not remember learning, but which seemed to live in his bones. Outside, the day brightened slightly, the clouds thinning enough to allow pale sunlight to filter through. The market sounds continued their familiar rhythm, voices calling, cartwheels rumbling, the general murmur of commerce and human activity. But inside the toy shop, all was peaceful and warm, filled with the quiet satisfaction of work well done and kindness freely given. Mr. Bellamy thought of Annie Fletcher walking home through the cold streets, clutching her precious package, hurrying to reach her brother and share the joy she had found. He hoped the little horse would bring the comfort she sought, hoped the boy's cough would ease and his strength would return, hoped that somewhere in the future, a grown woman named Annie would remember this day and keep her promise to bring toys and happiness to other children in need. It was a good hope, a gentle hope, and it warmed him more thoroughly than any fire as he bent to his work, his hands bringing forth from simple wood the small companions of childhood, the vessels of imagination, the quiet gifts of love. The afternoon found Mr. Bellamy engaged in a task he had been postponing for some weeks, the sorting and reorganizing of the upper shelves at the back of his workshop. These shelves held an accumulation of years, perhaps decades, toys that had been set aside for various reasons, pieces that had never been sold, experiments in design that had not quite succeeded. and occasionally items that customers had commissioned but never collected. It was not that the shelves were disorderly, exactly. Mr. Bellamy was too meticulous in his habits to allow true disorder to take hold. But things had gradually become jumbled, pushed back to make room for newer pieces, and he had reached the point where he could no longer easily see what resided in the deeper recesses of the shelves. It was time he had decided this morning to take everything down, dust it properly, and return it to its place with better organization. He had positioned his tall wooden ladder, a sturdy thing that had belonged to his father and possibly his grandfather before that, against the shelves and begun the slow work of removing items one by one. Each toy had to be handled carefully, examined for any damage that might have occurred during its time on the shelf, dusted with a soft cloth, and either set aside for restoration or deemed fit to return to its place. The work was slow but not unpleasant. There was something meditative about it, something that allowed his mind to wander through memories as his hands performed their careful labor. Each toy he brought down carried with it some association, a particular commission he remembered, a technique he had been practicing, a season of his life now long past.